Hello, it is I, Rtyuiope from Rtyuiope's Gameroom. And you know, after reviewing 2 Gungrave games back to back, I just really want to sink my teeth into a JRPG game, but I just don't know which one. Maybe one that was released for PS3, maybe released in 2013, perhaps published by Bandai Namco, maybe developed by Level 5 Entertainment, the people who made the Professor Layton games. We're talking about Ni no Kuni: Wrath of the White Witch today. You know, I'm actually really excited to start this game, so let's give it a try.
One eternity later.
I'm not joking. This game actually took me 5 years to complete. Oh god.
While Rtyuiope is trying to sort out what he's been doing with his life for the past 5 years, I thought I could tell you guys a little bit of the history surrounding this game. Ni no Kuni began development for Level 5's 10th anniversary, being announced in 2008 under the name Ni no Kuni: The Another World for the Nintendo DS. Something not many people know is that the widely beloved PS3 game is actually a remake of this DS game, called Ni no Kuni: Dominion of the Dark Shin, released in 2010. Which contains a similar story and gameplay mechanics. The reason you might not have heard of this game is because it was never released outside Japan, though we did eventually get the PS3 version 2 years after its release on Japan. Both games are mostly known for their ties to the legendary animation studio Ghibli, which provided the artwork and designs for areas, characters, familiars, and even animating cutscenes for the game. Their collaboration is kind of the starting point of the development of the game, which was aided by musician Nyao Fujimaki, who contributed music to both Level 5 and Ghibli. The collaboration was ideal, considering Ghibli had finished production on their feature film Ponyo, and Level 5 had a game that would be most suitable for the animation studio to contribute to. Studio Ghibli President Toshio Suzuki admired the passion of Level 5 President Akihiro Hino, agreeing to his proposal to work on a game alongside Level 5.
The game's creative process was approached in the same manner as any other Ghibli animated feature, set to only last about 3 months, which was quite a unique undertaking considering all the assets that are in the game. Still, this deadline was not met, but it didn't hinder the project in any way. Designs were done by Studio Ghibli veteran Yoshiyuki Momose, known mostly for his work as an animator on plenty of the recognizable and acclaimed Ghibli films, which may have been referenced in this title. The game's artwork follows the iconic style of the Studio Ghibli films, developed mostly by the studio's head Hayao Miyazaki.
What defines the Ghibli style are usually its round edges, soft expressions, and mixture of pastels and watercolor. This style is very distinct, especially when compared to other games, which makes it more beautiful compared to other RPGs. Though games like the Tales of Ceres or Sakura Wars utilize a similar palette, they can't quite capture the imaginative and fantasy-like feeling that the style contains, especially when it's packed with so much hidden detail while keeping its childlike simplicity and innocence.
I'm personally not a fan of the high fantasy genre with games like the earlier Final Fantasy games, the Tales of series, and the World of Warcraft series. But let me tell you, Ni no Kuni is and even still, there's truly something engaging and fun about the world of Ni no Kuni that just makes me want to put aside my bias and get sucked into the experience. This is definitely a result of Momose's artwork. Though his style might not particularly be his own, he still nails it in almost every regard, keeping that stunning quality that Ghibli films are most known for. His artwork, however, isn't the only immersive quality about the game.
Composed by Rei Kondo and Mamoru Fujisawa, otherwise known as Joe Hisashi, the orchestral score of the game provides an honest sense of adventure. Joe composed the primary tracks for the game, such as Pieces of a Broken Heart, Alley, and the game's main theme. While Rei Kondo composed background tracks such as Drippy and Motorville.
I also want to point out that the song Pieces of a Broken Heart was performed by Joe's own daughter, Mai Fujisawa, in Japanese. Meanwhile, Archie Buchanan performed the English renditioning, being the only person who was suited enough to fit the innocent sound of Mai. The The score of this game was so ambitious that the developers had to use a 4GB game cartridge in order to preserve the integrity of the music for the DS version. Aesthetics aside, how does this game actually play? Well, it's kind of hard to explain. You see, in a way, it's kind of like that One Piece Romance Dawn game on the 3DS, where you have an overworld exploration, town wandering, and combat, both in third person. In the overworld, you see the player avatar walk around exploring the vast and unique locations with plenty of hidden secrets, world building, and useful items. Some of the means of transportation available to you, besides walking, are boats and even a dragon, which is the best part of the whole game in my opinion, because you get to travel around really fast and appreciate the scale of everything around you. The game has no random encounters, instead you find enemies on the map that you can fight. Much like Pokemon or SMT, you can capture these familiars, or Ghiblimon as I like to call them, to use them as ally. Ghiblimon also have unique skills and stats that separate them apart from each other, which also encourages you to regularly switch them out. And of course, sure enough, I didn't want to do that, so I stuck with my starter familiars for the entire game and didn't switch once. You can also buff up your familiars by feeding them or evolving them with sun drops, moon drops, or star drops. Before the start of any battle, you have to start out by picking a character or a familiar to play as during said battle. During the battle, you are allowed to freely roam around the battlefield dishing out physical or magic attacks, and you can't just spam skills at your leisure though, since they're all limited by a cooldown. Your enemy can also use a big array of huge attacks that you can block in order to get HP or MP orbs as a reward. You can also deal these kind of attacks back at the enemy, except that the enemy isn't smart enough to really block them most of the time. In today's episode of Physical Editions, we will be looking at Ni no Kuni for PS3. This episode will be rather short considering that this version is pretty lacking in terms of content. There was a physical edition which was regular, and a limited edition which I do not have unfortunately, but what we have here today is the Greatest Hits edition, which features Oliver and Mr. Drippy on the front with the nice little logo right there. On the back, we just see a few shots from in the game, which is pretty cool. Nothing too out of the ordinary. On the inside, we get this cool little art of Oliver and Mr. Drippy looking over a cliff. And we, of course, have this really cool little manual. The manual, unfortunately, is only in black and white. I believe the regular edition has it in color, but here it is just in black and white, which sucks, but it has a lot of content in it to read over, which is pretty cool, and this alphabet, which you can use to translate certain puzzles within the game. And we got some more right here on the back. Also, the last little feature of this physical edition, and I believe the regular edition as well, is this cool reversible cover, which I really like. It has P, the White Witch, Oliver, Swain, and Esther on it, and it's a nice little thing that you could flip over if you really wanted to, but personally, just for the consistency's sake on my shelf, I just stick with the irregular cover right here. But anyway, that was today's physical edition of Ni no Kuni for PS3. Thanks for tuning in. You start out the game by playing as Oliver, the main character, though you get more party members like Swain, the swashbuckling thief and damage-taking tank, and Esther, who's a healer, and when I say she's a healer, I mean that term very loosely. I mean like, come on, Donald from Kingdom Hearts is more useful than she is. Screw you, Esther, I don't like you, and I'm sure your parents didn't like you either. Anyway, the combat has this kind of rhythm to it where you have to know when to switch back and forth between defensive and offensive positions, which can really keep you on your toes. I didn't think normal battles were that interesting, but boss fights on the other hand, now this is where you can truly flex your muscles when it comes to the skill and the combat system. Some enemies are weak to certain attacks, which makes switching between magic and physical key to finding the right one. Aside from that, kingdoms in the game are fully explorable, each one of them containing a plethora of side quests and other stuff that reward you for your exploration. Each one of them looks distinct from each other, which is really cool to see. On the other hand, dungeons are a bit more of a mixed bag. They're sometimes very boring or sometimes very engaging with plenty of puzzles to solve. I found the gameplay pretty off-putting at first, which may be the reason why it took me oh so long to beat it. But then again, now that my 25-hour playthrough is over, I gotta say that it was well worth it. And I mean, I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first. I always convinced myself that I wasn't really in the mood whenever I started it. But at the end of the day, all I had to do was sit down and actually play through it to realize how stubborn I was. All along, Ni no Kuni was a fun and great experience that I didn't regret playing even once. It's full of twists and turns both in gameplay and story. Oh yeah, speaking of story. The game follows Oliver, a little boy who's mischievous at times but ultimately is pure-hearted and only wants what's best for everyone. Little does he know though that his mischievous ways result in the accidental death of his mother, leaving him vulnerable and distraught. One day his stuffed toy Mr. Drippy, who I personally like to call Drips, comes to life.
Holy Jesus! What is that? What the fuck is that?
Anyway, he tells Oliver that his mom is still alive in some capacity, as her alternate form, or soulmate, exists in another world. Drips then leads Oliver to this new world in hopes of finding his mother's soulmate to bring her back to life. Along the way, Oliver makes friends with all sorts of kings and queens of the land, making some really great new friends and some not friends. Their main focus on the journey is to stop the evil Shadar, the dark Jinn, who could be behind all the darkness in the world and the broken hearts of the people. Oh yeah, and he may know how to bring back your mom. So far this is the plot of the Nintendo DS game, but the PS3 version actually adds some new story that expands upon who might be the one who's actually pulling the strings. This was truly an engaging story. There's many themes of death and acceptance, which are very hard topics to tackle on a game that's childlike in essence. The game actually managed to surprise me for once, and that's not something that every game can do. I honestly love how this game was veiled in an allegory about accepting death and overcoming sadness. I like to interpret everything going on in the story as Oliver using his imagination to cope with the death of someone close to him. I mean, sure, that's not actually what happens, which is further reinforced by the sequel, but hey, that's what I got out of it.
You know, Ni no Kuni was definitely a hard pill for me to swallow over all these years, and now that I've actually beaten it, I can say it's probably one of my favorite games on PS3. In fact, I were to say that if you had any similar biases as I did, I'd say cast those aside and actually give Ni no Kuni a shot. There's no real excuse here since the game is really cheap and you can pick it up at almost any game store or online. And you know, now that the sequel's out, now is as good a time as any to pick this game up and give it a shot. So I gotta ask, what's stopping you from playing Ni no Kuni for PS3? I am Rtyuiope from Rtyuiope's Gameroom, signing out.